Susan?
Testing. Testing.
Doing well, sir. How are you? Yes, sir.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Kay Kuntz, and on behalf of Silence is Not an Option, welcome to our forum and speaker series, and thank you for attending on Father's Day, especially all of you fathers out there. Before we get to start our program, though, I have a few announcements and housekeeping details. The first thing is to thank Circular Congregational Church and Reverend Jill Small, and of course Susan Dunn, who's probably working somewhere in the back, for allowing us to use this beautiful sanctuary and for coordinating all of the events, including the recordings. I have a couple of announcements about upcoming events. The Low Country Coalition Building Institute and YWCA of Greater Charleston invite you to join them for Building Bridges, an interactive pay-what-you-can workshop. Building Bridges program is designed to help individuals and organizations create more connected, inclusive, and resilient workplaces and communities across South Carolina. The workshop will be held on June 26th from 9 to 3 at the Palmetto Goodwill Center in North Charleston. Well, that's our first change for the day, August 31st. My script obviously said the 26th, but there are these little cards out in the vestibule with a QR code that will have correct information, I'm sure. So, announcement number 2. On July 8th, the League of Women Voters will host a film at the Terrace Theater from 1 to 3 on that afternoon. It's called Join or Die. It is a film. It's much more uplifting than that, I'm sure. It's a film about why community matters and how actually joining a club is very helpful for the community as well as for us as individuals. So there are flyers in the vestibule about that as well, in case I have also said something wrong. There are also restrooms in the vestibule to my right, and there are also some in the back in Lance Hall. And after the program, which will end at noon, the congressman will sign your books in the vestibule, and Buxton Books has them for sale, as you can see out there, so thanks to you for setting everything up for us. And my last assignment this morning is to introduce this dynamic father-daughter duo. Normally your speakers aren't behind you, so it's one of these leaders really, of course, didn't need much of an introduction in South Carolina or really anywhere in the country, and his daughter, Jim Clyburn, also is well known, of course, in South Carolina and beyond in her own right. Mignon served for 9 years as an FCC commissioner, including a stint as the first female FCC chairman. And before that, she served on our South Carolina Public Service Commission for 11 years, including 2 years as the chairperson. Since leaving the FCC in 2019, Mignon has been the president of MLC Strategies. She focuses on technology, media, telecommunications, and investor-owned utility industries. So thank you, Mignon, for being the interviewer today. We appreciate it. Now, I'm not going to recite all of the congressman's full bio. Many of you already know it, and we would be here a lot longer than we've agreed. But you can Google it if you need more details than I'm going to give you. What I am going to do is tell you a couple of little personal things, not too personal, Congressman. But I have known the congressman since I was 16 years old. In 1970, he recruited VISTA volunteers from all over the country, including my sister Linda, who is here with us, who left Arkansas to work on Edisto Island sight unseen. Now, I visited her that summer, to go to the beach mainly, but I did also volunteer in the children's program that VISTA was running that summer. And, like everyone else who has ever been a Clyburn volunteer of any kind, Once you are a part of the Clyburn volunteer family, you are always a part of the Clyburn volunteer family. So here we are again today, and I can tell you that in that almost however many years it would be since I'm 72, I have volunteered for almost everything he has asked me, whether it's public service or political efforts, including a long 4-year stint as the chair of the South Carolina Human Affairs Commission when my law school classmate Jim Hodges was governor. I'm going to fast forward through his congressional career, except to say that he served as co-president of the freshman class, chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus, chair of the House Democratic Caucus, House Majority Whip, and assistant Democratic leader. You see a pattern there, right? I'm going to fast forward, though, now to May of this year. And as you know, in 5 days in May, the South Carolina House passed a new congressional map for us, so that all 7 of our districts were drawn for Republicans, even though 40% of South Carolina voters are Democratic voters. Therefore, Democrats would have gone from 1 seat, which is about 15%, about to 0 seats. When the Democrats in the legislature were discussing their plan to fight this idea, they asked Congressman Clyburn for his advice. And I understand from folks in the room where it happened that he advised them to protect the process, not his personal political future. He said, protect the process. And most of you know that process takes almost 2 years from the time of every decennial census. That statesmanship and clarity of purpose was also reflected in what President Obama said about him. Congressman Clyburn is one of the handful of people who, when they speak, the entire Congress listens. And one more testament to his reputation and experience, and that voice, was also evident on May 26. Y'all all know what that was, the first day of early voting. And it was the day that the South Carolina Senate was set to vote on redistricting. What the senators saw in real time as they were debating this plan was voters from all over South Carolina, well beyond the 6th district. They were showing the legislature what they thought of this redistricting plan. Those state senators saw voters break every single early voting record in every single county in this state. So we knew that the early voting effort was a success when even the most conservative member of the South Carolina Senate changed his vote. He said, "Neither my conscience nor my common sense will allow me to stop an election that is already underway." And with that, Senator Cash joined 13 other Republicans and all 12 Democrats to vote late that afternoon to stop the redistricting effort in South Carolina, at least for this year. So, in the 6th district, we know we have to share our congressman with everybody in the state because they all need his leadership and his voice. Because when he talks, what he says, what needs to be said, but he says it in a civil way, in a thoughtful and respectful way. And today, in his additional role as one of South Carolina's best historians, he has agreed to share his time and knowledge and experience with us as he and Mignon discuss his latest, but probably not his last, book, The Original 8. So help me welcome them and thank them for joining us on this Father's Day weekend.
Good morning, everyone. So I would like to thank Kay for that generous introduction, all of you for braving the beautiful elements outside, by the way. It wasn't too much of a weather stretch for you to make it, but there are a lot of things you could be doing this morning, and to join us in this incredible sanctuary that is full of environmental and social activism is very meaningful. Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning.
Is your mic? Are we okay with your mic?
I think so.
Is it protected?
I don't know if I need it.
So it's great to share the stage with you. I'm trying to think. Many of you have fascinating stories about Jim Clyburn. I first became aware of him about 64 years ago. And I can honestly say, not a day has gone by when I have not been amazed and moved and motivated by his commitment to narrowing persistent divides and leveling fields of opportunities. It has ordered my steps, so to speak, in terms of my professional journey, and for that and more, the day before Father's Day, I thank you.
Thank you. You've been such a great daughter.
Now, he said that last line in front of you, but trust me, I have to hitch a ride with him. I won't hear that again today. But thank you for being, nice in public. You've got this cumulative record, in my humble opinion, that is almost impossible to match. I can think of so many ways that you looked at your district, affirmed some of its challenges. Oh, they're going to bring you a more robust mic. And used your influence and abilities to level the playing field. But we're here to talk a bit about your book, and we'll get to that before. Kay's going to keep time for me because, I'm a PK politician's kid, so I can go on and on and on. But those familiar with your latest book cannot help but notice that two common notions of history appear to be in tension with each other. Specifically, that we should learn from history to avoid repeating its mistakes, and the phrase, history has a way of repeating itself. Now, where do you think we are in American history with these two notions? Is history repeating itself? And can we still avoid repeating some of the worst moments in our nation's and state's history?
Well, let me begin, Mignon, by thanking you for doing this. I cannot think of a better way to spend Father's Day weekend than to have you moderating this discussion today. It might be better if your two sisters were to be here with us, but then that would start a debate that would keep us from the book. But let me also thank all of you who are here today. And if you indulge me just for a moment, just let me really, Jimmy Bailey back there, who I probably knew before any of the rest of you, who helped me get started in politics way back in 1970. Thank you so much for being here, Jimmy. And of course, many of you, Linda, raise your hand. Linda, raise your hand. Your sister just introduced and presented you. She said I recruited her to come here from Arkansas to Edisto Island. That wasn't much of a change for her. Might be some distance, but that was way back or around the same time. And so thank you so much for still hanging out with me and Kay. Thank you. Mitch, thank you for being here. The very first time that I ever was thought to need sled protection, they assigned Mitch to me. And of course, I knew him as a football player at South Carolina State, and he went on to be a member of SLED, and thank you so much for your friendship over the years. I think I thank you. I remember one time we were in Hilton Head, and threat levels had gotten kind of high. And so I was on the golf course, but Mitch went with me on the golf course, and we were coming back. We got back, and I was loading my golf clubs in the back of the car, and a young lady came by and saw this big gun he had in the trunk. And she says, "Are you protecting him?" And he said, "Yes." She said, "Well, if somebody were to start shooting, are you going to lay down and cover him?" He said, "Oh, no, somebody got to carry the message." I never have forgotten that. So guys, don't y'all listen to Mitch. Thank you. And last but not least, Annette McKenzie, thank you for being here. Many of you know Annette, many of you may not. But some of you know that I spent most of my time at South Carolina State in the theater. Now, I don't tell people this a whole lot because I don't want to live down the reputation, but I was much the thespian, and I've done 4 pretty big stage plays. And I've said this before, and I'm never going to walk away from this. I've seen 4 full productions of Porgy and Bess, but the best production I have ever seen was its initial production here in Charleston at Gillard Auditorium, and Annette was the star. And thank you so much. I don't know if I've ever seen a better rendition of Bess. You were. And thank you for being here. And I try to pay her back annually. She comes to my prayer breakfast, sits at the table with me, and I want to thank her for being here. Her brother for bringing her, who was one of the better photographers we've ever produced here in Charleston. And where? I don't see it.
Don't we have family? Ann, are you here? Is that you? There she is.
There you are. My goodness.
Now, he doesn't call her Ann, so that's why, you know.
No, thank you for being there on my mother's side. So thank you for being here. This book, to me, is a cautionary tale. In the epilogue, I write that because I started out to write this book for fun, because I keep the pictures of these 8 people on one of the walls of my office. And invariably, people would come in and want to know who those people are. And one day when I was explaining who they were, one lady in the group said to me, "My goodness, I thought you were the first African American to serve in Congress from South Carolina." And I kind of playfully said, "Oh no, before I was first, there were 8. And so I told my staff later that day, I said, "You know, my next book, this happens to be my 3rd, is going to be about these 8 people because people need to know them. And I want to introduce them to the public." Well, in the middle of writing the book, the 2020 election came. And I'm sitting one night and I'm watching the reaction to the election, and I saw those people banging on those windows and doors up in Detroit, trying to break into where they were counting the ballots. And all of you remember that infamous telephone call down to Georgia, find me 11,780 votes. I knew what was happening. They were trying to establish another set of electors, much the same way as they did in 1876. In 1876, after the elections, at the time you needed 185 electoral votes in order to be elected president. When the voting was over, Samuel Tilden of New York had 184. He was one vote short. Rutherford B. Hayes of Ohio had 165, 20 votes short. Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina had set up 2 sets of electors. One set of electors pro-slavery, the other set anti-slavery. You may recall from your studies here in South Carolina, we had 2 people declare themselves governor. So, you know the Constitution says that whenever we do not get a winner in the Electoral College, the election gets thrown into the House of Representatives. So that's what happened here. The election was thrown into the House of Representatives, and the House could not figure out what to do. The country had never been in that place before, and they had to make a decision. So they appointed a 15-person committee, which was really a commission because people were on this committee outside of the legislature, so it was not really a committee, but 15 people on a commission. These 15 people were to meet with the candidates and make a recommendation to the House as to what to do. Well, they met, and I was not in the meeting, but I know what happened as a result of the meeting. Those 3 states had among them 20, exactly 20 electoral votes. If Hayes could get all 20 of those votes, he would become president. He would go from 165 to 185. So when they met, the 15-person committee decided to give the 20 votes in dispute to Hayes. Why? Why did they give those 20 votes to Hayes? Because Hayes, in their meeting, made a promise. You give me these 20 votes, I know what you want down in Florida, I know what you want in Louisiana, and I know what you want in South Carolina. You all want to go back to pre-Civil War days. Give me the 20 votes. I'll bring it in to Reconstruction. Well, the 15-member committee voted 8-7 to give the votes to Hayes. Reconstruction came to an end, not by some big wave, by a vote of 8-7, one vote. That made Rutherford B. Hayes of Ohio President of the United States by a vote of 185 to 184. Not a big wave, a single vote. He, within 30 days, brought an end to Reconstruction, which was the beginning of Jim Crow. So Jim Crow became the law of the land by a vote of 185 to 184. So when people tell you this country has never been as divided as it is today, tell them it has been. Now you ask me about the cautionary tale. I used to teach history, as many of you know, right here in Charleston. And I used to tell my students all the time, anything that's happened before can happen again. And so, most of you, if not all of you, have heard the Spanish philosopher George Santayana's admonition: if you fail to learn the lessons of history, you're bound to repeat them. A lot of people say history repeats itself. Some say, well, maybe not so, but it certainly has a rhythm. Well, history does repeat itself over and over again. The question we have to ask ourselves, have you learned the lessons? And if you've learned the lessons, the results do not have to be the same. We know what resulted after the 1876 election. Now, I'll close my answer with this. In the run-up to that election, you know from your history, when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, he was replaced as president by Andrew Johnson, who was his vice president. Andrew Johnson was on that ticket not because he was Lincoln-like. He was on that ticket for just the opposite reason. It was a fusion ticket. Lincoln was the first Republican president. He was anti-slavery. He was getting ready to run for re-election. And he thought he needed to do something to ameliorate the South. He brought Andrew Johnson onto that ticket as a fusion ticket. He was a slave owner, a white supremacist from Tennessee. He had no business on the ticket. But Lincoln thought that's what he needed to do in order to get reelected, and he put him on the ticket. He did not plan on getting assassinated. But when he was assassinated, that meant that the president became, Andrew Johnson became president. Andrew Johnson, a white supremacist, a slave owner, until he became vice president. He got rid of his slaves. And someone who set out to restore the South to the pre-Civil War days, to undo everything Lincoln had done. And when he refused to follow what Congress was saying to him and telling him to do, the House impeached him. He became the first president to be impeached. And when they impeached him and sent the impeachment to the Senate failed to convict him by one vote. So the three most consequential things that happened to African Americans in the history of this country were each decided by a single vote. The impeachment of Andrew Johnson, the end to Reconstruction, the beginning of Jim Crow, each one of them decided by a single vote. And we're there again.
You spoke about what led up and the mood of the country on the eve of all of those major decisions. And you made it very clear it wasn't some, nearly unanimous mandate. One of the reasons I think you will agree that it was because of the contributions and the advocacy of the 8 men you spoke about. When you pick up the book, if you haven't already done so, you see a lot of affirmations to that effect. We're going to talk a bit in a second about those 8 South Carolinians. but there were a number of persons around the country, I think between a period where there's 17 African, I'm trying to show off like, that I read the book, which I did. Because he's one of those, what you won't see on stage is if I didn't read the book, I'll hear about it later. He said I could tell. Oh, he can tell. But you had some people, you had 8 people in this state, very different. They didn't all get along. Right. But each of them in their own way made contributions and fought like, you know what, in order to change the trajectory. Can you speak about their contributions to the shaping of our history and talk a bit about the way or the lack of reflection of their contributions through the media and beyond?
Well, thank you very much for taking us there, because often people don't go there. And I think it's very important for people to understand. These 8 people were different. Only 3 of them had ever been enslaved. Those 3, Joseph Rainey was from Georgetown, born enslaved, but his father was a barber. And he was allowed to keep some of his earnings as a barber. And when he accumulated enough money, he bought his family's freedom and moved from Georgetown here to Charleston and opened a barber shop in the Mills House, the same Mills House, the motel today. It doesn't look the same, but that's the same spot where he had his barber shop. Everybody knows that Robert Smalls was born enslaved and know how he got his freedom right here in the Charleston Harbor. And then there was George Washington Murray. George Washington Murray was from Sumter, a little place that I know something about. Not only was he from Sumter, but he was from Spring Hill, where my daddy is from. In fact, you see in the book, there is still a debate raging as to what my relationship is to George Washington Murray. Some say by marriage. One of my aunts said a lot of things happen without the benefit of marriage. Now I have the 3rd company trying to find the connection. I've paid 2 companies, and they have not been able to find it. Skip Gates from Harvard says his company is going to find it. I hired his company 2 years ago. I'm still waiting on them to give me the information. But these were the 3 who were enslaved. The other 5 were never enslaved. They were not South Carolinians, except for one, and I'll say a little something about him. Robert Brown Elliott was the most prolific attorney of his time. Robert Brown Elliott was from Sumter. He came to South Carolina from Massachusetts. He was educated in Liverpool. So all the stuff you read about the ignorance of these people, not so. Richard Kane was pastor of Emmanuel Church, born in West Virginia, educated at Wilberforce University in Ohio, was sent to Charleston from Bridge Street AME Church in New York to rebuild Emmanuel Church, which had been burned down after the 1822 insurrection of Denmark Vesey that you're getting ready to have a play about. I'm familiar with the play. In fact, I'm trying to angle to play a little part in that play. They're getting ready to have an opera about him. I'll do the acting, Mitch, if you get backstage and do the singing. Highly educated. Thomas E. Miller. Thomas E. Miller was born in a little place called Faribeville, you know today as Ridgeland in Jasper County. The name has changed since he was born. Thomas E. Miller was not even black. Thomas E. Miller was a grandson of Thomas Haywood, a signer of the Declaration of Independence. He was Haywood's daughter's child, born out of wedlock, given up for adoption, and the African-American family adopted him, brought him to Charleston, and he was educated, got his basic education here, went off to Lincoln University and HBCU in Pennsylvania. Now, there are two Lincolns. One is in Missouri, but he went to the one in Lincoln, which is in Pennsylvania, which is the same school that Thurgood Marshall graduated from. When he graduated from Lincoln, he had gone there from New York. He made the decision to come back to South Carolina rather than going back to New York. And the interesting thing about him, he died right there on Ratcliffe Street, just a few blocks from here. And the interesting thing about him, those of you who got the book, if you look on page 229 of the book, you'll see a tombstone. That tombstone is right up there next to Magnolia Cemetery. There's a little cemetery. There are a bunch of cemeteries up at Magnolia. You probably have never seen them. I Googled these cemeteries when I found out where he was buried. He's buried in the Brotherhood Cemetery, right just a few steps from Magnolia, the cemetery that Julius Warren is buried. I went to that cemetery. I found his tombstone. I pulled out my device, took a picture of it. So the picture you see in the book, the reason it looks so grainy is because it's off my phone. And I decided that I was going to put my picture in the book rather than getting the professional person to take the picture. And the wording on that tombstone is an admission by Miller that he knew he was not black. And the most interesting thing about Miller, although not black, when South Carolina State was stood up in 1896 to be an all-black school, and the law said there should be nothing but black students, nothing but black teachers, but the law didn't say anything about the president. So the first president of South Carolina State, Thomas E. Miller, was not black at all. But he was one of the best presidents South Carolina State ever had.
One of the things about that, another note, and I'm not trying to spoil anything, trust me, whatever I say, the words in the book, the pages in the book will amplify it more beautifully than I ever could. He was in Congress at the time, I believe, at least the first, I think the second Moral Act.
Yeah, second.
And so, can you speak more to that? Because again, when you talk about contributions that are perpetual, these men in their own way advocated for, I think we take for granted that 1870, correct me if I'm wrong, in 1890 schools,
1890,
and they just hatched. So you had two, bites at the Moral Act apple because of.
Yes. Well, Morrow, this gentleman from Rhode Island, or maybe Vermont, was way up in New England, introduced the Morrill Act. His name was Morrill, and he was a congressman who was not educated himself, like Robert Smalls was never formally educated, but it was Robert Smalls who presented the resolution that created the first public schools for all in South Carolina. And South Carolina became the first state in the Union to provide public education for the non-elite. Morrow introduced this legislation to train rural people, educate them to agricultural, A&M. A lot of people think the M stands for mechanical, and it does. But if you read the Morrill Act, it was also military. And I'm going to tell you why I pointed that out. Well, Morrill introduced a bill, it passed, and was signed into law by Abraham Lincoln. The first Morrill Act created land-grant schools in 1862. However, Clemson became the land-grant school for South Carolina. And Clemson was established by the son-in-law of John C. Calhoun, who put in his will this money is for the education, to build an institution to educate whites only. And that was the case throughout the South. So the very first land-grant school was Cornell. And believe it or not, these land-grant schools did not admit black people. So Morrill, in 1890, was still in the Congress. Just tell you something about term limits. 1862, he created the land-grant school that created Clemson. He was still around in 1890, so when this issue came up, Morrill took it upon himself to get a second Morrill Act passed. This time, he put in the law, if you do not allow for the education of blacks at your school, you must establish a school for them. That's why you hear South Carolina State called an 1890 school. So there was a second land-grant school created. Thomas Miller was in the Congress when that happened. And though he had gotten defeated by George Washington Murray and had come back to the state legislature, he was in the state legislature when the South Carolina State was stood up, and he made the deal with Pitchfork Ben Tillman to take over the school because they had to set up a school or they were going to lose Clemson. So that's how South Carolina State got there, and that's how Thomas Miller got to be president. He was there. He resigned from the state legislature and became president of South Carolina State. So that's how all happened. So Miller Hall, that you used to hang out in front of, well, I did. I'm not going to cause any trouble. Is named for Thomas Miller. Yeah.
One of the many interesting features is that this is not a typical political memoir. When you see most, they're about the subject, about the person holding the pen. But again, you chose to amplify and educate us on the eight that came before you. And yes, it is true that you weave your personal reflections and milestones in that. Why is this book not more of a focus on you?
Because it's not about me. That's not why I wrote the book. My first book was called Uncommon Courage. And my first book was about the 23 petitioners who signed that petition that created Briggs v. Elliott that became Brown v. Board of Education. Those 23 people. And what I wanted the public to see as the first two signatures on that petition, Harry Briggs and his wife, Eliza Briggs. Harry Briggs and Eliza did not have an education. They were from Renee's home county of Clarendon, Somerton, the town of Somerton. Harry was working at the filling station, making $22 a week. Eliza was working as a child lady at a motel, making $18 a week. They signed the application. Both of them got fired from their jobs. Both of them had to leave South Carolina, moved to Florida first, and then from Florida, they went up to New Jersey. But I wanted people to see what monumental things can come about when just ordinary people do extraordinary things. And that's what that book was about. My second book was called Blessed Experiences, and I really put the emphasis of that book, though it's my memoir, on my mother and father. In fact, everybody that reads the book tell me the chapter on my mother to them was the most prolific chapter in the book. Thus, I wanted to be about these 8 people, their trials and tribulations, their fortitude, their faith. I mean, Richard Kane came to South Carolina on faith. Rebuild Emmanuel, was so successful at rebuilding Emmanuel, the church got over 6,000 members. It got too big. So he then went over to Morris Street and brought some property over to Morris Street and built Morris Brown AME Church, where I still hold membership. So he became both the pastor of Emmanuel and Morris Brown, having named Morris Brown after the former pastor of Emmanuel, who had been chased out of town and had gone up to Philadelphia to work with the founder of the AME Church and became the second AME bishop. Kane himself became the 14th AME bishop. I wanted the emphasis to be on these people and how they overcame these things, how Joseph Rainey, Robert Brown, Robert Smalls. I mean, who am I to get in front of Robert Smalls, who I call in the book, and I say in many speeches, to me is the most consequential South Carolinian who ever lived. And when I say that, every now and then I see somebody look and I can see on their forehead they think it's John C. Calhoun. I know we read at Calhoun Street, and some people think it's Strom Thurmond. I didn't know Calhoun, but I knew Strom. They were consequential. I'm not saying they were not consequential, but they were not as consequential as Robert Smalls. Think about this. Born enslaved, at the age of 12, he was sent to Charleston by his enslaver to work and make money and send all except $1 back to the master. While here, working first as a lamplighter, in fact, my research tells me that where he lived was at the little livery where all the horses stay now, up over that, in the loft of that livery, is where Smalls lived. He finally got a job at the most treasured place you could get a job back then. And when I first came to Charleston, it was still very treasured, on the waterfront, is now a longshoreman, but at the time, he was working on the ship. He playfully one day, when the 3 white guys who ran the ship left the ship one Friday evening, they did that every Friday. They would leave the ship and come into Charleston and would not come back until Saturday afternoon. And one day while they were gone, Robert Smalls started prancing around the ship, making fun of the captain. He flopped the captain's hat on his head, and one of his buddies said, "Smalls, when you put on that hat, and start imitating the captain, you look exactly like him. And that put the thought in his head to plot out his escape. And he did. He didn't act alone. He brought his wife in on it, told her what his plan was. And she told him that she would support the plan, and if it meant death, she would die with him. Well, he brought 5 or 6 of his buddies in on the plan. They all kept the secret. And on one Friday, when those guys left the ship, he put his plan to work. He had learned the currents. He had learned what the whistles meant to get by the sentry points. He had 5 sentry points to get by. He successfully navigated that ship after absconding it. His wife brought along a white bed sheet. They raised that bed sheet up instead of the Confederate flag. And he says the only thing that raised anxiety in him was whether or not the Union soldiers would honor the rules of law. When they saw that white flag of surrender, would they honor it? He said that was his only anxiety. Well, they did. And they got the biggest surprise of their life when they found out that that ship had nothing but enslaved people. But they delivered the ship. He got a financial reward for it, authorized by Abraham Lincoln. He became one of the nation's, if not the nation's, biggest celebrity. Now, the reason I tell you this is because here's why he was so consequential. There were 2 big things in his life that made him, in my opinion, the most consequential. As you can imagine, that ship was worth everything to the Confederates. It was their best ship. That ship, they wanted back. They wanted Smalls dead or alive. And they put a bounty on his head. Some of my research says $6,000. I've seen some that says $4,000. I don't know how much it was, but it was enough. So one day that ship was spotted. It was carrying munitions from Port Royal over to Morris Island. And when that ship was spotted, the Confederates opened fire. And the battle got so fierce, the captain of the ship ordered Smalls, who was navigating, ordered him to beach the ship and surrender. Smalls knew what that meant for him. And the captain got so frightened, he ran into the coal bin. Smalls locked him up, took over the ship, and using some very colorful language, says he was not giving up that ship. He carried out the battle, won the battle, took the ship back to harbor, and when they found out what happened, they fired the captain and made Smalls captain of the ship. And Smalls became the first African-American naval captain and was not even in the Navy. And so you read all this history about who was the first black naval captain. They don't have it right. It was Robert Smalls. And I'll tell you something else history doesn't get right and why he's so consequential. Robert Smalls got his freedom in May, I believe, of 1862. The Union Army was losing. They didn't have enough manpower. At the time, Frederick Douglass was up in Washington, D.C., had become a good friend of Abraham Lincoln. He was trying to get Lincoln to allow the freedmen to fight in the war. And first there was a law against it, and when they got the law changed, Abraham Lincoln still wouldn't do it. General Saxon, who was in charge of the Union forces down here in Charleston and Beaufort, he decided that if anybody could get Lincoln to relent and allow him to bring freedmen into the war, it was Robert Smalls. So he sent Robert Smalls up to Washington in August of 1862. Think about that. This man was a slave in May. In August, he is sitting down with the President of the United States, and it worked. Lincoln was blown away by him, and he authorized Smalls to come back to South Carolina with a letter to recruit 5,000 freedmen to fight in the war. The number got up to 180,000. And Lincoln said, were it not for the freedmen, the war would have been lost. That's an exact quote from Abraham Lincoln. You find, I believe, on page 18 in the book.
One of the things, if you're connecting the chronological dots, is the fact that these men were extremely young.
Yes.
I mean, you talked about when, can you imagine a preteen, on his own in Charleston.
He was 12 years old when he got here. He was 17 years old when he worked on the waterfront. He was 23 or 24 when he sat down with Abraham Lincoln. That's right.
And chronologically, the others were in their 20s. When they, rose, to prominence. Sadly, many of them, died in their 40s. Again, we're talking about, and I'm trying to get myself in trouble before Father's Day, but I believe you were 52 when you got elected.
Yeah. And if all goes well, the 21st of next month, I will celebrate the 47th anniversary of my 39th birthday.
So there you go.
If I can help you out a bit.
Yeah, no. Look, I don't want this to be a single source of, questioning here. So if you have any questions, come to, the center aisles, and I believe we have a mic. But mic? I'll, for the sake of time, I know he took it, so.
I'll use yours.
Yeah, it's over here. It just didn't work as well. So if you have any questions, if you can stand up and our trustee Vanna White, or I don't know what we're going to call you today.
I've been called a lot worse.
No doubt. As persons prepare their questions, one of the things that I can't help but note is that someone is standing up, and I will pause and hold my question. Sir, if you can identify yourself and your question, please.
Okay. Congressman, you made a very interesting observation about the narrative that was spun about Reconstruction after Reconstruction. I'm a history buff, and a lot of the history was written by Southern historians who created that negative narrative. That was propaganda. Yeah. So today we live in propaganda. We have propaganda on our cable channels that will let you believe that the insurrectionists were tourists visiting the Capitol. We now have a major consolidation in media with Paramount. Is there a possibility in 2029 that a new president, a new Congress will institute antitrust provisions to break it up?
Yes, there is a great possibility. And I think we'll get in some of the most serious antitrust discussions taking place today. People have been talking about it for a long time. That's a subject that comes up very often, but I think people are getting serious about it now. I know I never thought, and I've not talked to anybody yet who tell me that they could imagine that this country would devolve to the point it has on these issues of constitutionality. I never thought I would see a Supreme Court give what amounts to absolute immunity to a president that really places the president above the law. And when people ask, what is this guy thinking about? I can't come to any other conclusion than to say, because I really believe that people are carrying out roles. These roles were assigned long, long time ago, and they are carrying out their roles. I don't believe this stuff is happening in isolation. Now the question is, are there enough people dedicated to the proposition that we are in pursuit of more perfect union? One of the people I studied when I was at South Carolina State, I still refer to him a lot, Alexis de Tocqueville, in his 3-volume work, wrote that America is not great because she is more enlightened than any other nation, but rather because she has always been able to repair her faults. And the question is whether or not we will continue that greatness. Abraham Lincoln was repairing a fault with those 2 Emancipation Proclamations. I think the Supreme Court was repairing a fault with 1954 Brown v. Board of Education. I think the Congress was repairing a fault with the 1965 Voting Rights Act. There were faults that were exposed that we decided that we were going to continue our pursuit of a more perfect union, repairing these faults along the way. Now the question is, are we going to continue that? Virginia and I just happened to be in Chicago for the opening of the Obama Center on the 18th. I mixed the days. Yesterday was Juneteenth. Well, the official opening was on the 18th. I think the public opening was yesterday. We were there on the 18th. And when I listened to Michelle Obama's speech, I kept thinking about de Tocqueville's 2-volume work, Democracy in America. A little bit of it with Obama, but a lot of it in Michelle's speech. And so I think that the people are beginning to see that we just can't just meander, that we've got to get intentional about preserving this democracy. And we've allowed antitrust laws to run amok.
You brought up the word meander, and it's curious because it was embedded in one of the questions I didn't know if I was going to have time to ask. I read in your book, and then there's a word fatigue that was used when it came to different points in this, Reconstruction, an evolution, that more than one lawmaker and more than one newspaper affirmed or said point blank, how long are we expected to do this? And you hear that now, how long? In addition to the things that you're hearing there and hearing now, you mentioned Andrew Johnson's blanket pardons.
Yep.
Those aren't new. Andrew Johnson issued blanket pardons. When it comes to voter intimidation, you use this phrase a lot, certain or creative devices, including political violence. To be honest with you, Edgefield was a hotbed, for some of this. I also took note about and pick up on any that you see fit, because I have this stream of consciousness. My dad just kind of breathes in and breathes out, because I call it idea pollination. So I'll move from place to place. The isolation that these 8 had to feel, because there was more than one time, especially at the end, when there was only one.
Sure.
And so any of those you choose, or one that you choose, there are a lot of things to be said, but it affirms the strength and the challenges, and maybe can explain some of the prickliness, in some of the members. I can't imagine being threatened every single day. Your families are, it was just a lot, to be honest with you.
It is a lot, and look, I'm asked the question a lot. How do you do it? Well, I've been studying these guys all my life. My father introduced me to Robert Smalls when I was a little boy. When I say a little boy, I'm talking about in kindergarten. Believe it or not, my mother had a kindergarten in our church when I was growing up. My first introduction to education was as a 3-year-old in the kindergarten that my father had in his church, little church in Sumter, South Carolina. I don't think we had 100 members, but we had a kindergarten with everybody in the neighborhood. So I knew about these people. And so when I asked for their pictures to be put on the wall of my office, I may have been the only person in the office that knew anything about these people. I've learned a whole lot from them. I mean, Alonzo Rancia, I didn't mention him. Rancia was right here from Charleston. In fact, I just had some libations with his great nephew in Columbus, Ohio, about 3 weeks ago. His name is Rancia. He's there. He practices law there in Ohio. There's some great grandchildren right here. What's his name's wife? Oh, my frat brother's wife had the boat that you didn't want me to get on.
Harriet
Her
Cochran.
mother was
Harriet Cochran.
Cochran. What's her name?
His name is Rudy. Her name is Harriet.
Rudy's Harriet. She's the great-great-granddaughter of Alonzo Rancia. So I knew all these people. I had no idea they were related to Rancia. After the book came out, Harriet called me and told me, and said, that's my great-great-grandfather that you just wrote about. I knew her when she was a little child. I had no idea who she was. So you don't get immune to it, but you certainly don't let it get the best of you. I mean, look, I had faith in Big Mitch. I got faith in these guys today, but I don't go around reluctant to live as I think I need to live, but I do accept all the criticism and keep going. People will say, why are you doing this? But, it's just, well, why are you running again? I think that people kind of saw in this debate the other day why I needed to be running again this time. Because I'm not too sure we would have won that battle the other day if I were not in the race. So you never know why things happen. And so you just can't get hung up on it. You don't run out looking for credit. I came to the conclusion a long time ago that I could get a lot of things accomplished if I didn't get hung up on who get the credit. So you just do what you think you're supposed to do and hope things turn out. And if they don't turn out, you make the adjustment. One of the things I should never forget, I don't know if that young man, I don't even remember which one of my friends said it. We were on the Student Center's porch at South Carolina State. We were about juniors at the time, and the sit-ins were running rampant, and we were all out there trying to justify our existence. And we used to have these arguments on the Student Center porch. I mean, they were never real serious, but serious. I never said, yeah, in the middle of one argument one day, we stopped one of them says, well, what is life to you? And the response was, I shall never forget, a series of adjustments. That's what one of those students said that day. One of my friends. Life is a series of adjustments. I've adopted that. It didn't come from me, but it's mine now.
And as we wind down, if there are any other questions, please, Jimmy Bailey.
All right. We'll let yours be last.
Yeah, we'll
Thank you, Congressman, for being here. I really appreciate it. Your endorsement was very integral to Joe Biden's pivotal win in the state to ultimately go to the White House. As we look to 2028, what are the characteristics in people that are visiting the state? Or I guess, what do you look for in a candidate that comes visit the state to earn your endorsement, right? What's the direction for 2028 in the party?
Well, I don't. I'm going to be careful how I say this. and the reason is I've told everybody, and I've asked that question a lot, that I am not going to give any thought to 2028 until I get beyond November 3rd, I think it is, of 2026. And that is not to postpone the question, but that is to say to you, and I seriously believe this. Now, Mignon just brought up some of what was going on in the 1870s. These creative devices is what I call them in the book. In fact, there's a section in the book I call creative devices. Just think about this. How insulting is it to show up at a voter registration office and being asked to tell me how many jelly beans are in that jar?
how many bubbles in a soap? Yeah.
Bubbles was in this bar of soap. These are the questions that were asked in Alabama and Mississippi of people. When you can answer how many bubbles are in this bar of soap, you can get the right to vote. Now, it's not that crash today, but read. This president just said 2 days ago that I'm not going to sign this. I want this bill to come to me, and I want the SAVE Act to be attached to it, or I'm not signing it. The SAVE Act is nothing but modern, creative devices to suppress the vote, to keep people from registering to vote. That's what the SAVE Act is all about. Anytime you implement a bill, and so when people tell you, and this is another thing somebody mentioned earlier about what people say. You know, I've seen the stuff said that I said that I believe that people should identify themselves at the poll. I got it in my pocket right now. I keep it. My voter registration card. That's what identifies me when I get to the polls. I didn't say I got to believe in your form of identification. I believe in identifying yourself. But if you tell me that a picture ID is good if it's a hunting license, I've never hunted in my life. I hunt golf balls. I've never fished. I fish for golf balls. But my student ID card, my picture on my student ID card is not good enough. But a picture on a hunting license is good enough. Who hunts? That's the stuff you will find in the SAVE Act. That kind of stuff. And that's what they're talking about implementing. So, you know, sometimes, you know, though I try to keep it suppressed, it's like the other day, I think 2 or 3 days ago, I saw the candidate for governor, the lieutenant governor, said that the reason she said what she did to the students at South Carolina State is because people only try to censor conservative thought. I was invited to do the commencement at what was then Baptist College and offered an honorary degree until somebody on the Board of Trustees raised the issue of my pro-choice position being contrary to the schools. And I got a letter disinviting me and withdrawing the offer of an honorary degree. Now, that's because that young lady doesn't know the history. And so the point I'm making here is people are entitled to their own opinions about people. I may take issue with it, but you're entitled to that. And the facts don't have to prove you're right, but you can have an opinion. And so for those students to say you don't comport with our thought process, that's no reason for you to say, I'm coming anyway and you ain't gonna like what I got to say. I have real problems with that. But the same thing is just on both sides of the equation.
We'll allow your former colleague to take the last question.
Absolutely.
First of all, I'd like to remind everyone that something Jim said. There were 3 elections that were won by 1 vote. We have an election coming up Tuesday. I hope everyone will go vote. 1 vote made the difference so many times. Now, my first election, I had a resounding victory. I won by 17 votes. Jim, I would, having been involved in politics in an elective office, I understand how important it is, 1, for seniority, and 2, for what committees a person's on. Would you share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I serve on the Appropriations Committee. We have a rule on our side that when you get on the Appropriations Committee, you're not allowed to serve on any other committee because now a lot of people think the most important committee in the House of Representatives is the Ways and Means Committee. I beg to differ. You're important to a lot of people when you're writing the tax laws. But in my opinion, the most important committee is the Appropriations Committee. If you think that's a joke, I did a virtual meeting at noon on yesterday with the new CEO of the Charleston Ports Authority. We got a new CEO. We spent time together on yesterday. And he didn't call to ask about my health. He is concerned about what is going to happen going forward. There's going to be some announcements involving the port very shortly, involving trade and tariffs and the impact that's having on this port and what we can do to ensure that it goes forward. The importance of that is if you look at the rankings that just came out last week from 1 to 435 as to who has been able to deliver the most from that committee. in financial support to the state and congressional district they represent, you will find that the top on my side of the aisle is yours truly. And it's very clear that you build seniority, and seniority is just not about time. People seem to look at that as about it being chronological. It's not just chronological. You build seniority if you got any good sense by developing relationships. And, you know, I go out of my way to help that congressman from Rhode Island who needs something. And ain't no my skin off my back for that congressman to get what he needs. And I say this because I just got a long text yesterday from a congressman from Rhode Island wanting my help on something. And you know what? He's going to get it. Because what he's asking for has absolutely no impact on South Carolina. All he needs is my vote. And he's going to get my vote.
So, Congressman,
You know why?
okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. And we'll have go ahead, please. Wrap up your thought.
Because I'm going to go right back to him in a couple of months.
Yeah, I knew.
It's the Charleston Port needs a little something.
Right. So we've got about probably 90 seconds left, and I'll probably take 90 seconds. So, yeah, they want you to sign their books, I believe. Right. I think they're waiting for us to move to the back, right? Is that why you're standing there? Okay,
That's
yes.
the bust some books people.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
I know they are.
Yeah.
Let me just thank them. These people have been going throughout South Carolina. We were in Georgetown. We were here together not long ago. I have to say, that young man, not so young man standing up there, grandfather, Julian Buxton. I talked about you, Jimmy, helping me get politically. Way back when I ran for Secretary of State, his grandfather called me. It was the CEO of Williams Furniture Factory. Y'all know the Williams-Brice Stadium in Columbia? That's the Williams.
So in the negative 30 seconds that we have left, so I want to say that I hovered over the first 8 forward for a pretty long time. There were 2 former students of yours, Ralph Dawson and Jamie Harrison, attributed their success and their entrance, their ability to get into Yale, in large measure to you. You came down, you taught at a new high school in Charleston that was created, and I quote from them, to relieve the pressure to integrate the local public schools here in Charleston. You and your late wife, Miss Emily, looked through your yearbook and affirmed that upwards of 70% of your class left. 82% of your class? 82% of your class after graduation left South Carolina for what they thought were greener pastures. Why did you stay? Why did the 2 of you stay?
Well, I stayed in large measure because of a lady named Edna Lukens. When I was in high school, my senior year, Edna Lukens was one of my teachers. She was a Bible teacher. I graduated from Mather Academy, which was United Methodist School in Camden. And this was like the beginning of this last semester. She asked us to write an essay on what we wanted to do after graduation. And I wrote my essay based upon what I thought I wanted to do. I wanted to finish high school, and I was going to go to college, and I was going to live in New Jersey. I spent all my summers working in Paterson, New Jersey. Emily and I had gotten married we got married in Patterson. The plan was to live in New Jersey. Well, when Mrs. Lucas read my essay, she called me into her office, and she said to me, I read your essay, and I was very disturbed by what I read. And she wanted to tell me that what I expressed in an essay was a dereliction of what I professed. And she told me that if all the young African Americans, she probably said Negro at the time, were to develop that attitude, get educated, and leave, the South would never get any better. You should feel obligated to stay and help make things better. And of course, I heard her, but didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it until I sat down and went through my yearbook. And I went through that yearbook just in sight, nothing scientific, just pointing out where everybody go. And 82% of the students who graduated from South Carolina State, when I did, left the state. Then when I got in the governor's office, John West commissioned a professor from the University of South Carolina, Brager, Professor Brager. It's called the Brager Study. Here's what the Brager Study found. In the graduating class of 1970, over 70% of the students that graduated from the University of South Carolina remained in the state. Over 70% of the students that graduated from South Carolina State left the state. Now, those events, starting from my high school graduation through my years in the governor's office, is what made me who and what I am today. Is when I decided Ms. Lucas was right, that I was derelict, and I was not. I thought so much of her, you may remember, until I found her after all three of the daughters were born. She was in a nursing home in Asheville, North Carolina. I took Mignon and her sisters to Asheville to sit down with Miss Lucas. She was in what we call a nursing home, the elderly, for seniors. And we sat down because I wanted them to meet this lady that had made such a difference with me. And by the way, Edna Lucas was white.
So I want to thank all of you for joining us and offering an additional, I will say, 6 minutes. And by the time I say goodbye, I want to thank you, Congressman Clyburn, for once again offering another installment of this such a rich and powerful history. Two quick things I will say. I couldn't end without quoting, at least in part, Robert Smalls and James Clyburn. Robert Smalls has said, and again, a series of thoughts. My race needs no special defense. All they need is an equal chance in the battle of life. And Jim Clyburn has said more than once about these men, equity is what they sought. They sought and they wanted treatment according to their needs and nothing else. So again, I thank you for joining us. Please show your appreciation for Mr. Clyburn.
Thank you.
And a happy Father's Day.
Thank you.
And he'll be in the back to sign his books as soon as y'all will let him get back there.